Namaste, and welcome to our continuing series on the life divine with our beloved Ranga. I have a few things to say before we begin, and they are especially of gratitude to the hundreds of people who are writing in their praise of Ranga's discussion of the life divine, and also others who let us know through friends how moved they are listening to this series. So thank you all. It's much appreciated. We are in the chapter Reality and the Integral Knowledge, beginning on page 674 with the line, in fact, subjectivity and objectivity are not independent realities.
So, before we read this para, let us see in summary what he has said in the previous para, so we get the sense of continuity. So, he's saying there is the materialistic view, okay? There is the opposite view to the one we hold. What do we hold? We hold means the integral yoga thinks that there is a reality and the physical world is an expression, is a manifestation of that reality. But so the world is real, but it's a secondary reality. But the materialist view is the opposite. It says that there is no such thing as spirit, matter is the only reality, and anything else that has come out of it, maybe life or thought or whatever, is all a product of matter. So Swami is discussing that. There is the opposite view to the one we hold, that the spirit is the ultimate and the ultimate reality. Is the ultimate and the ultimate reality, and the physical universe is a phenomenal representation of this reality. That's our view. This theory, called positivism or materialism, holds that the objective world is the only reality and all else is a product of matter. To be proved real, everything must be verifiable by the senses and the physical mind, and all that cannot be so confirmed by the senses is unreal. Your thoughts are unreal, your emotions are unreal. They are not real, they are subjective. All our subjective emotions, mental thoughts and experiences, are nothing but the effects of the workings of matter. The chemical reactions of matter produces thoughts and emotions. If pushed to the extreme logical conclusion, a plum pudding or a stone would be more real than our noble thoughts, love, courage, genius, greatness of the human soul, which faces and conquers the difficulties and challenges of life and becomes master of nature. All this has no value. Literature, music, poetry, no value. They are only products of matter. Obviously, this is an extreme view that looks only at one side of existence and is therefore invalid. Rather, we may have the opposite view and consider the objective world to be only an occasion and a field for the self-manifestation and self-experience of the spirit soul. The spirit is the reality, and the objective universe is only an outermost form, shell of that reality. This is the integral view. Both the subjective and the objective are real and complementary to each other. Matter is real, but the spirit is not hallucination, rather a greater reality. Spirit is real, but matter is not only a shadow or an illusion, it is the house, the habitation for the Lord. This is the integral view. So, with this we come to the para that we have to read today.
But don't you feel that this materialistic view is rapidly going out of style.
Oh yes, very much so. But the old view of matter being real still is strong in many Western minds. It is still there, but it is changing. The experience of consciousness being the ultimate reality is the fundamental reality, and matter is the secondary reality. This is growing. There is no doubt about it.
Very much.
This is growing. It's being accepted. In fact, subjectivity and objectivity are not independent realities. They depend upon each other. They are the being through consciousness looking at itself as subject on the object, and the same being offering itself to its own consciousness as object to the subject. We'll discuss it. The more partial view concedes no substantive reality to anything which exists only in the consciousness, or to put it more accurately, to anything to which the inner consciousness or sense bears testimony, but which the outer physical senses do not provide with a ground or do not substantiate. But the outer senses can bear a reliable evidence only when they refer their version of the object to the consciousness, and that consciousness gives a significance to their report, adds to their externality its own internal intuitive interpretation, and justifies it by a reasoned adherence. For the evidence of the senses is always by itself imperfect, not altogether reliable, and certainly not final, because it is incomplete and constantly subject to error. Indeed, we have no means of knowing the objective universe except by our subjective consciousness, of which the physical senses themselves are instruments, as the world appears not only to that but in that, so it is to us. If we deny reality to the evidence of this universal witness for subjective or for supraphysical objectivities, there is no sufficient reason to concede reality to its evidence for physical objectivities. If the inner or the supraphysical objects of consciousness are unreal, the objective physical universe has also every chance of being unreal. In each case, understanding, discrimination, verification are necessary, but the subjective and the supraphysical must have another method of verification than that which we apply successfully to the physical and external objective. Subjective experience cannot be referred to the evidence of the external senses. It has its own standards of seeing and its inner method of verification. So also, supraphysical realities, by their very nature, cannot be referred to the judgment of the physical or sense mind, except when they project themselves into the physical. Even then, that judgment is often incompetent or subject to caution. They can only be verified by other senses and by a method of scrutiny and affirmation, which is applicable to their own reality, their own nature. It's a little complicated, but we'll make it, we use different words and explain what he's saying. Okay, so to do that, I will go straight away to the summary and then we'll discuss it from there. I'll explain from there. Subjectivity and objectivity. Are they independent realities? There is a question. So, the spiritual view is that there is a subject and the object, but they are the same. At the highest level, Sat Chit Shakti Ananda is all one. Subject and object are not different, they are the same. Now, the materialist is saying that the physical world can be perceived through the senses. Now, we'll look at this. We have discussed this many times, but it's a very important thing. The physical world is cognizable to you, can be cognized by your senses. If the senses are not there, the physical world doesn't exist for you. And the physical senses, what do they consist of? First of all, there are the organs. Then there is the nerve that takes the sense data to the brain, and the brain is interpreting that what you are seeing. Okay? And that interpretation is done by discrimination, reason, and a intuition. So if that is not there, then the physical world is only images. Now, let us say the sense is not working. I go blind. Okay. My eye is working, but the nerve is not working. I go blind. Now the eye is working and the nerve is working, but my mind, for any reason, has stopped interpreting. What happens then? This is what happens when your mind goes silent. When you are able to silence your mind, the mind is not in a working condition. It is static. So the physical world appears unreal to you. You see only forms, but no interpretation. You see a tree, but it's not a tree in the sense that you understand it. It's just something growing like that. So it becomes unreal. Okay? So this is the thing. So when the materialist says that reality has to be subject to the senses, the answer will be, but the senses themselves are defective. You may be colorblind, you may be deaf. Okay? Your olfactory nerves may not be working. I have somebody at home who can't smell. He can't distinguish smells. So, but can you say that the objective is unreal? This is the question. So, your objectivity depending on your senses, which are not perfect at all. So, this is the first answer, that your instruments of knowledge are defective. So, you are not seeing the real thing, you are not at all perceiving. Also, another thing, the senses that man has got, other senses in animals, birds and animals, they are far superior. The eye of the eagle is 10 times more powerful than the human eye. Okay? Then there is a chameleon which we can only see in front, but a chameleon can turn its eye and look backwards. So, we can't do that either. So there are so many. The dogs can smell things which we can't smell. Okay? So all these things show that your senses are imperfect. So your sense of reality depends on instruments which are faulty. And ultimately, your reality, the physical world reality, is depending on the senses. Therefore, the objective is subject to your subjective understanding. So, if the materialist says that your thoughts and your supraphysical truths, spiritual experiences are unreal because they are not subject to the senses, they cannot be verified by the senses, the argument is, but your senses themselves are defective. So, if the supraphysical is unreal, then so is the physical world unreal, because you are seeing with wrong instruments. Okay? Now there is another thing. At every level of consciousness, knowledge is different, but the instruments of knowledge also are different. Okay? And that's very, very obvious, because usually we give the example of the subatomic levels. You have to use a microscope. Your eye won't do. So you have to use a microscope to see that. Or if you want to see the farthest stars in the universe, you have to use a telescope, which is not the same instrument. So at different levels, you have to use different instruments for knowledge. So in the physical world, we are using physical senses. In the spiritual planes, these senses won't work. They are of no use. So you have to use subtle senses. You have to use different instruments of knowledge, for knowledge. You have to use intuition. You have to use sight, subtle instruments of knowledge. You have to use identification. These become the instruments. That's what Swami is saying. Okay, so now, with this background, I'll read the summary. Subjectivity and objectivity, are they independent realities? They are not. They are dependent on each other. Consider the following. The objective physical world does not exist for one who has no physical senses. Very clear. There is a consciousness, subject, and there is an objective universe. Through the five senses, man perceives the world. The senses present their data to the brain, manas, and then the subjective consciousness experiences the reality of the objective world. Take the baby. His senses are living. He can see, he can hear, he can everything. But the mind is not yet developed, the instrument of interpretation. The world is meaningless to him. He hears sounds, can understand nothing. He sees his own mother, he can't recognize it because this interpretative manas is not working yet. So that's the most important part. So it is subjective. So scientific argument is not valid. That's what Swami is pointing out. It is more true to say that the subjective consciousness looks at itself, object, and cognizes it. Also, the objective world presents itself to itself, now subject, in order to be cognized. This is the theory of the Sankhya, which says that Purusha is subjective and Prakriti is objective, spirit and matter. Now, at the highest level, spirit, Chit, consciousness, is telling its own force to create and present formations, forms to itself, create forms so that I can enjoy the forms. So, subject is looking at its own objects as though separate. So, the separation starts at the overmind level. At the supermind level, they are really the same. Subject and object are the same. That is the experience of identification with the divine, identity. You become the divine. There is no object and no subject. And that's the reason why the experience of identity with the divine is subject, object of knowledge and subject, and knowledge itself disappears. Knowledge disappears. You experience directly yourself. So there is no knowledge. Okay? So that is what Swami is saying here in this paragraph. The relative material view grants no reality to the subjective thoughts or emotions or subtle perceptions when it is unable to submit itself to the examination of the physical senses. If the physical senses can't see your thoughts, they are unreal. If your physical eyes and my senses can't see or hear your or understand your emotions, they are false. That's a materialistic view. Okay, so, but we must note that the physical senses are imperfect and very limited. Also, the physical senses can have reliable information only when they present their data to the manas, which is a subjective element, mind in you. And it is the manas which gives meaning to what the senses experience. In the absence of manas, all sense-based information becomes either false or meaningless, which happens in silent mind. When the silent mind says, I am on a holiday, I won't work anymore, the interpretative faculty is silent, not reacting. It only receives data but does not interpret. So the world becomes unreal to you. You see the world but unreal, no meaning at all. Okay? So not only so, but the manas contributes its own additions to the data of the senses by judgment, discrimination, intuition, decision making, verifiability. Now, our senses are collecting data from there and sending to the mind. But the baby is doing the same thing and yet it does not understand. So what's the difference between an adult who understands the universe and a baby who is using senses and having data yet not understanding? Because these factors have to be there. Judgment, discrimination, intuition, decision making, verifiability are all absent in the baby. But they are there in mind. Okay. So it is supplemented. So manas is supplemented by the other elements. Okay. So clearly, object and subject are linked and complete each other. Okay. So we must realize that there are various planes of existence and each has its laws and its instruments of knowledge, and these are not interchangeable. Subtle realities cannot be subjected to the physical senses. They have their own laws and methods of verification of reliability. Subjective experiences, spiritual experiences have to be verified exactly as in science, but not by the physical senses, by senses available at that level, by repeatability, experimentation and verification. The same laws apply as in science, but instruments are different and the field is different. That's what Shamli is saying. Okay? So now, we go to the next para. There are different orders of reality. The objective and the physical is only one order. Then there is the vital world, then the mental world, then the spiritual world, there is overmind and then the supermind. They are all different worlds. And each one has got its own laws, its own substance, its own ways of working, and its own instruments of knowledge. And they are not interchangeable. It's like in India, we speak, let us say, Hindi. That is not applicable in America. So it's a different field and a different laws apply there. Okay, so depends at which level you are. You have to use the instruments of knowledge valid at that level. Okay, so there are different orders of reality. The objective and the physical is only one order. It is convincing to the physical or externalizing mind because it is directly obvious to the senses, while of the subjective and the supraphysical, that mind has no means of knowledge except from fragmentary signs and data and inferences which are at every step liable to error. So, I can look at you and maybe I can understand your subjective sadness by your expression on the face, but it can be full of errors. Okay, you may be crying, but you may not be crying out of sadness at all. You may be crying out of joy. So my interpretation will be totally wrong. Okay, so that's what I'm pointing out. Okay, while the subjective and the supraphysical, that mind has no means of knowledge except from fragmentary signs and data and inferences which are at every step liable to error. In fact, let me tell you an interesting incident that happened. Is exactly this. I was in a meditation hall once and I know of a person who was very, very psychic. He had a tremendous psychic approach to Mother and Sri. So he went into the meditation hall and he looked up at the picture, the painting of Mother and Sri sitting, done by Pramod Kumar.
The big one.
The big one, painting, not a photograph. He looked up and his devotion was such that he started crying. And someone who didn't understand this principle at all came and he started saying, "Why are you crying? What has happened to you? Why are you crying?" Total misunderstanding of the thing. So it can be full of errors, is saying, that's it, except by fragmentary signs and data and inferences, which are at every step liable to error. Okay, so our subjective movements and inner experiences are a domain of happenings as real as any outward physical happenings. But if the individual mind can know something of its own phenomena by direct experience, it is ignorant of what happens in the consciousness of others, except by analogy with its own or such signs, data, inferences as its outward observation can give it. Okay. I am therefore inwardly real to myself, but the invisible life of others has only an indirect reality to me, except in so far as it impinges on my own mind, life and senses. This is the limitation of the physical mind of man, and it creates in him a habit of believing entirely only in the physical and of doubting or challenging all that does not come into accord with his own experience or his own scope of understanding, or square with his own standard or sum of established knowledge. So, I should point out one thing. Swamiji is using here, he is using the word, I am therefore inwardly real to myself. There are some people who misunderstand this and think the Swamiji is talking of himself. No, not at all. It's just a general statement. Okay? So, he's saying that someone who understands himself does not understand the other. It's a way of putting that.
But the person is so small.
Yes.
The universe is so vast.
Exactly.
The ego
Yes.
is a small part of the whole person.
Yes.
How can one feel that way?
Exactly. That's, to put it in a nutshell, what you're saying, how can the finite understand the infinite?
Exactly.
Not possible.
Exactly.
Okay, so now we read the summary of what he's saying here, to put it in a nutshell. There are different grades and planes of reality. The objective, the physical, is one of them, perhaps the lowest. This physical reality is cognizable by the physical senses, and there it is real to the normal physical man. The physical mind uses the manas as instrument and can see only this physical world. It cannot see the supraphysical worlds. The subjective, the inner psychological movements are out of its range of capability. Thus, only my emotions and feelings are real to me, but those of others are a closed book to me. This is because of the limitation of the physical mind. Man, unaware of his limitation, believes only his own cognizings, but disbelieves all else, even if very real to the others who experience them as their own thoughts, feelings, emotions. That's all. It's very simple. So, we go to the next para. This egocentric attitude has, in recent times, been elevated into a valid standard of knowledge. He is talking of science. Okay? It has been implicitly or explicitly held as an axiom that all truth must be referred to the judgment of the personal mind, reason and experience of every man, or else it must be verified, or at any rate verifiable by a common or universal experience in order to be valid. But obviously, this is a false standard of reality and of knowledge, since this means the sovereignty of the normal or average mind and its limited capacity and experience, the exclusion of what is supernormal or beyond the average intelligence. Okay, so, all right, so it's a false standard. I read that sentence again. But obviously, this is a false standard of reality and of knowledge, because he used the word since. Okay, since is because. So, in India, people understand that more easily. Okay, so knowledge, because this means of sovereignty of the normal or average mind and its limited capacity and experience, the exclusion of what is supernormal or beyond the average intelligence. Okay, so you are eliminating a whole lot of things which are real to others and in other fields. In its extreme, this claim of the individual to be the judge of everything is an egoistic illusion, a superstition of the physical mind, in the mass a gross and vulgar error. The truth behind it is that each man has to think for himself, know for himself, according to his capacity. But his judgment can be valid only on condition that he is ready to learn and open always to a larger knowledge. So what is real for him is fine, but he has to open himself. It is reasoned that to depart from the physical standard and the principle of personal or universal verification will lead to gross delusions and the admission of unverified truth and subjective fantasy into the realm of knowledge. But error and delusion and the introduction of personality and one's own subjectivity into the pursuit of knowledge are always present, and the physical or objective standards and methods do not exclude them. Okay. The probability of error is no reason for refusing to attempt discovery, and subjective discovery must be pursued by subjective method of inquiry, observation and verification. Research into the supraphysical must evolve, accept and test, and appropriate means and methods other than those by which one examines the constituents of physical objects and the processes of energy in material nature. So what he is saying is that senses are valid at this physical level, but at the other level senses are not valid. You have to use different instruments of knowledge. Okay? Again, it's very simple. I am reading the summary of what he is saying. This egocentric, self-centered way of knowledge, based on one's own physical senses, has been validated in recent times as the only true cognition. It is a materialistic view. What I see is the truth. Okay.
But let me ask, we see that these days hundreds and hundreds of people have out-of-body experiences.
Yes.
And they're the same. They see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yes, yes. So they are verifiable.
They're verifiable.
Yes. So if it is verifiable, it is true. That's the argument in favor of.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
But to the realist, they still wouldn't be verifiable.
Yes, because as Sri Aurobindo says, everything can be doubted. Everything can be doubted. And then he says something very interesting. He says, doubt exists for itself. It doesn't need any reason. He says that very clearly in one place. Okay? And then in Life Divine he says that doubt has got a positive value. Okay? Don't believe everything that comes to you. Have an open mind, research, investigate, find out, verify, and then believe. So doubt can be negative as well as positive. Negative doubt is bad, it is destructive, it is corrosive. But positive doubt, I am not sure but I will verify. That's good, that's a good one. In fact, Sri Aurobindo says in Life Divine, very interesting, everything can be doubted. You can doubt the reality of the physical world. You can doubt the existence of God. You can even doubt your own existence. The materialist says God doesn't exist. The Mayavadin says the physical world doesn't exist. And the Buddhist says even you don't exist. So everything is possible. So everything is possible. Okay, so this view, it is hypothetically asserted that all knowledge to be considered as valid and true must satisfy the personal mind, reason and experience of the individual. This view cannot be considered as justifiable because the ordinary mind of man is limited and imperfect and is yet made the final arbiter of all true knowledge. This is a gross error. Okay. When something is imperfect, you cannot say that will give you true knowledge. You can't. It is imperfect. And how do you know it is imperfect? We see that. We don't see everything. Okay? We don't see the future. We don't see what is there in the next room. But there are people who can see, because they use different instruments of knowledge. You use subtle senses and you can see. You can see the future, you can see what's there in the next room, you can see what's 100 miles away. Okay? However, there is a truth behind this way of thinking. It is this, that each person must think for himself, know according to his capacity. But he must be ready to go further with an open mind and not take his present knowledge as final. That's a positive doubt. Okay, then. It is held that to depart from the physical facts may well lead to inaccuracies, errors, distortions. But this weakness is true of all human knowledge, not only spiritual knowledge, but all human knowledge. Even your physical science will give you error. So why do you make that argument that error is bound to be there in a subjective experience? If you are having a spiritual experience, the scientists will say that you may be imagining, it's not true. But the argument is that error is here also in the physical world. So error is something common to everything. So error is not an argument. Okay, so. But again, the possibility of error must not restrict us to only the physical field. The unwillingness to expand one's borders because of the possibility of error is a weak and sterile attitude. The hesitation to investigate the subjective fields is not justified because there is no verification possible. The verification of subjective experience must be done by subjective methods and subjective instruments. Objective standards can have no application there in the subjective fields. This is the reason why Srinath used to verify everything that he was experiencing. I'll give you 2-3 examples. One, he is seeing that he has got foresight. So, foresight tells him that Nolini and his friends are going to play football in the police grounds, Odeon Salai. They are playing football. They will come back at 6:32. 6:32. So he notes it down. Then when they come back, he verifies whether they have come back at 6:32. Now, is that enough? No, it is not enough. Is my clock right or wrong? That I have to check. Now, suppose they came at 6:35. My foresight was not fully correct. So I'll test again. So this is the way he was testing. The same way is saying the scientific method of experimentation, verifiability, and then conclusion is absolutely correct. That is how it should be done. So even spiritual experience should be subject to verifiability.
I remember one comment of his that he had been testing more rigorously than any scientist in his laboratory.
That's right. That is what he says in a letter. That's what he says. Yeah. The verification of subjective experience must be done by subjective methods and subjective instruments. Objective standards can have no application there in subjective fields. As you said, different ways of knowledge and different rules and different laws and different instruments of knowledge. They apply everywhere. So.
We have time to do one more
Sure.
para.
Okay. So.
To refuse.
Now, Srinath says, to refuse to inquire upon any general ground, preconceived and a priori, is an obscurantism as prejudicial to the extension of knowledge as the religious obscurantism which opposed in Europe the extension of scientific discovery. So, if the materialist says, I don't see spiritual experience, so I don't care for it, So they're saying it's an obscurantism. Just like in Europe, during the church was insisting that it is the sun that goes around the earth, but scientific knowledge was just coming and they were refused. So that's an obscurantism. You must be able to verify, experiment and come to a conclusion. But experimentation and verification is necessary. It should not be obscure. There should be no refusal to experiment. That's exactly the problem with also the religions.
Yeah.
Okay? So, the only way to have true knowledge of God is to believe in Christ. This is a statement which is not open and it's a closed statement. Okay? That's not true. You must be able to go beyond such axioms. That's what they're saying. The greatest inner discoveries, the experience of self-being, the cosmic consciousness, the inner calm of the liberated spirit, the direct effect of mind upon mind, telepathy, the knowledge of things by consciousness in direct contact with other consciousness or with its objects, most spiritual experiences of any value cannot be brought before the tribunal of a common mentality which has no experience of these things and takes its own absence or incapacity of experience as proof of their invalidity or their non-existence. If I can't see, it doesn't exist. This is a totally wrong argument. That's what Sridhar is pointing out. Okay? Because there are so many things here. We'll look at all those one by one, we'll see examples of what he's saying. Okay, so. Physical truth or formulas, generalizations, discoveries founded upon physical observation can be so referred. But even there, a training of capacity is needed before one can truly understand and judge. It is not every untrained mind that can follow the mathematics of relativity or other difficult scientific truths or judge of the validity either of the result or their process. All reality, all experience must indeed, to be held as true, be capable of verification by same or similar experience. So, in fact, all men can have a spiritual experience and can follow it out and verify it in themselves, but only when they have acquired a capacity or can follow the inner methods by which their experience and verification are made possible. It is necessary to dwell for a moment on these obvious and elementary truths because the opposite ideas have been so sovereign in a recent period of human mentality. They are now only receding. Okay, this was written 100 years ago, and as we were saying, now they have receded quite a lot. Okay, the materialistic view is slowly disappearing.
I read last night that there are many, many who believe that God is the creator.
Yes. That's right. But there are many who still believe that God created the world in 7 days. And then took rest on a Sunday. As though he needs rest. Okay. So, have stood in the way of the development of a vast domain of possible knowledge. It is of supreme importance for the human spirit to be free to sound the depths of inner or subliminal reality, of spiritual and of what is still superconscient reality, and not to immure itself in the physical mind and its narrow domain of objective external solidities. For in that way alone can there come liberation from the ignorance in which our mentality dwells and a release into a complete consciousness, a true and integral self-realization and self-knowledge. So, there are several things here which need to be looked into, but first of all, we'll just see the summary and then there are some words which also need to be looked into. So, I am reading the summary of what we read just now. Any a priori refusal. A priori axiomatic, hypothetical. To begin with, I say, I don't believe this. Or you make a statement which is categorical. That's an a priori statement. Refusal to inquire into and examine further, extend one's knowledge, is an obscurantism and a foolish self-limitation. Oh, no, that is nonsense. I will not believe in that. This is obscurantism. Why don't you try and... Normally the human mind says that because it's very difficult. But difficulty is not something that you can say it doesn't exist. It does. Climbing Mount Everest is difficult, so you won't do it. Your man does it. So, it's an obscurantism, a foolish self-limitation. This is as bad as, if not worse, of religious bigotry in Europe when scientific knowledge was opposed by the church and declared invalid. He's giving an example. Spiritual knowledge, such as the self, the witness self, the cosmic consciousness, the liberation of the spirit, the direct communication of mind with mind, etc., cannot be subjected to materialistic jurisdiction, which wants itself as a final arbiter of all knowledge. The senses, you cannot use the senses, the senses cannot be the judge of spiritual experience. That's what Shamli is saying. The subtle fields of knowledge must use their own subtle instruments for investigation and verification of their data. Even physical facts and truths cannot be judged by normal, untrained mind of man. As he says, everybody can't understand the theory of relativity, and that's a physical thing. So even there you need training. So exactly in the same way, if you want to understand spiritual experience, you need training. Okay? It's not open to everybody. Okay. So too, even physical facts and truths cannot be judged by the untrained mind of man. One needs to train the mind to interpret and explain scientific facts. Similarly, for spiritual experiences. So too, the subtle truths of spiritual life cannot be understood or judged by those not familiar with subtle laws of the inner life. The same processes of scientific inquiry, experimentation, repeatability, verification are applicable in every field. But the instruments and methods have to be relevant and commensurate to those fields. Scientific instruments cannot be used to verify the subtler truths of other ranges. To refuse oneself freedom to discover, investigate, and organize the laws of the subtler planes is an irrational blindness. Okay, so in this context we can say, in India, that is the reason why 100 religions were allowed. Each one is allowed his own investigation. Find out for yourself the truth. And for you it is valid. So that is why the sense of tolerance came in India. It's valid for him. Who am I to say it's not valid? Experiment and find out for yourself. Okay, so now there is one word here. He has used the word immure. Okay. Now
Immure.
Yeah, immure means to lock up or confine as in a prison. Wall in. It comes from the French word mur. Mur means a wall. So immure means to wall in, to confine. Okay, that's a word. So,
I think that's good for tonight.
okay. So next time, an integral knowledge demands an exploration.